What's up, YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Each week I'm going to take you with me on my adventures into the world of cars. So let's get right into today's video. So for today's video, we're going to do a quick deep dive on the top 4 EV pickup trucks, which are going to be coming to market soon, and talking about some of the pros and cons of each, as well as the features where they stand out versus the competition. Everything that I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be coming out within pretty much a calendar year of right now. By mid-2022, all of these are probably going to be on the market. So some of those dates are a little bit flexible and, subject to change. That's based on current information that I have. But in general, they all should be out within the next year. So that's pretty exciting. So the 4 vehicles that we're going to talk about the Rivian R1T pickup truck. We're going to talk about the Hummer EV pickup truck. We're going to talk about the Tesla Cybertruck. And we're going to talk about the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck. All right, so I've gathered a bunch of information and we're going to skim through it. And I'm going to tell you kind of where each vehicle stands in regards to that information. And it's an interesting distribution. Some of the vehicles are really good in some areas, some are very good in others. This is all on paper, though. This is what they are saying. So take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. Some of the numbers also are estimates, so someone might not tell exactly what their vehicle weighs or exactly how much power it makes, but this is based on the latest information that I was able to find searching the internet. So take that with a grain of salt, but overall it should be fairly accurate. And then obviously once vehicles are in hands of testers and journalists, we'll have a lot more information. All right, so I've got a bunch of criteria for what I wanted to cover, and I'm just gonna read off the screen for a moment so I can list all of those things, and then we're gonna talk about them individually. But I'm gonna go through them pretty quick because I don't wanna waste your time. So we're gonna go over the weight, the charging rate, the charging time, 0 to 60 for the top trim model, the battery sizes, bed payload, towing capacity, the driving range, the horsepower for the top trim model, the torque for the top trim model, the motor count, the base price, the loaded price, the availability, and seating. So how many people it can carry. Putting my laptop down. So those are all going to be kind of the areas that I want to cover, and we're going to really focus on which vehicle is best at those things, and maybe a couple that are notably worst in those categories. So let's get right into it. All right, so weight. Best in class for this is the Rivian. The Rivian is clocking in at 5,886 pounds for the R1T. So this is way at the other end of the spectrum from other vehicles, notably like the Cybertruck or the Hummer EV. Those are significantly heavier. The Ford is somewhere in the middle. It's 6,500 pounds, so it's certainly 700 or 800 pounds heavier than the Rivian, but it is nowhere near the heaviest truck. Tesla has not said how much the Cybertruck will weigh, but it's going to be rated as a Class 2B vehicle, so it's probably going to weigh somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 pounds. So that's a pretty heavy vehicle. But as far as actual numbers, the Hummer EV is far and away the heaviest. So at 9,046 pounds, the Hummer EV is the heaviest that we know for sure. Cybertruck maybe or maybe not heavier, but it is 4,000 pounds or so heavier than... do some math, Fred. It's at least 3,000 pounds heavier than the Rivian. 2,800 and some change maybe over the Ford. So the Hummer is definitely the heavy one. The Rivian's the lightest one. Up next is charging rate. The Hummer EV is far and away the fastest. They use an 800 volt charging architecture, which you'll see in a minute that affects charging times. The Tesla is at 480, and that's traditionally what the Tesla superchargers use. And then both the Rivian and the Ford are at 400 volts. So a little bit slower than the supercharger, but nowhere near where the Hummer EV is. All right, so up next is quick charging times. So if you park for 10 minutes, how fast is the vehicle going to charge? Now this should be no surprise, but the Hummer EV with 800 volt charging architecture is far and away the fastest. You can get about 83 miles worth of charge in 10 minutes, and they advertise 100 miles of charge in 12 minutes. So that's better than everybody else. So the Rivian is close. The Rivian's at 70 miles in 10 minutes, and the Ford is at around 53 miles in 10 minutes, which neither of those are bad. It's enough time to go into a gas station, grab a drink, go to the restroom. Maybe they'll be called restroom stations because they're not going to be selling gas. Anyway, so those aren't bad, but they're not nearly what the Hummer has. The Cybertruck, I couldn't find any figures, but based on some of the other stats they gave about the batteries and current Tesla vehicle charging times, you're looking at probably somewhere between 50 and 60 miles in 10 minutes. So not bad by any means, but the Hummer EV with 83 miles in 10 minutes is far and away the best. That is if you can find an 800 volt charging station. So that's something to consider. So 0 to 60 times. This one's a close one. The Tesla Cybertruck is the winner. 2.9 seconds advertised for 0 to 60. Tesla's been pretty accurate with a lot of their estimates about the prior vehicles they've made, saying, hey, it can do X, it comes to market, and it can indeed do X. So I think 2.9 is probably pretty accurate. However, the Hummer EV and the Rivian both are saying 3 seconds. The Hummer EV, there's a little asterisk saying that they will probably be able to do 3, whereas Rivian has come out and said, yes, we can do 3 seconds. The Ford is a little bit slower at 4.5 seconds, which is still, if you think about it, that is like C7 Corvette fast in a full-size pickup truck that weighs 3 tons. So that's pretty amazing to me. But yes, all of them are fast. The Tesla is edging everybody out by about 1/10 of a second. And knowing them, they're probably going to have some software updates. So when you get the highest powered model, you're probably going to see that actually drop a little bit further. Though it also wouldn't shock me if GM, maybe even Rivian, step up and say, hey, let's see what else we can do. So battery sizes. This one's pretty interesting because the weight of the vehicle and the number of motors play into what that overall battery range is. And so the size of the battery is one of those other factors that plays into it. The winners here are Tesla and the Hummer EV. Both are around 200 kilowatt hours. They don't actually have the exact numbers for either vehicle, especially since neither have made it to market. I'm sure they're kind of finalizing things, but it'll be right in that 200, 210 range for both. The Rivian comes in a little behind that at 180, and the Ford at the top spec trim at 170, but those are all large batteries. Keep in mind that largest battery isn't the full story, because also the Hummer EV has a lot more weight to carry than some of the other vehicles, so something to keep in mind. Bed payload. Well, surprise, surprise, the Cybertruck also wins this category. They're advertising 3,500 pounds of cargo can fit in the back of the bed, and that's across the whole model range. That's not just the top spec model, that's even the base model with only 2 motors. So that's actually a pretty interesting thing, is that all of the Cybertrucks will hold 3,500 pounds. The Ford and the estimated storage for the Hummer EV are at 2,000 pounds, and then the Rivian's a little bit below that with 1,760 pounds in the back. So that gives you a sense of the ranges. But that's pretty impressive. The Tesla is literally almost double of what the Rivian truck is. So that's a pretty big amount. So if you're going to be carrying a lot of gear, keep that in mind. One other thing worth mentioning too is that the bed in the Cybertruck, the wheels and tires are so low that they don't have those kind of traditional wheel well arches that cut into your usable space. The bed, I believe they call it the vault, on the back of the Cybertruck is actually a square, rectangle shape. It doesn't have those wheel wells, so you actually get more storage too than a traditional pickup truck in that regard. So up next is towing capacity. Now there's a little bit of an asterisk next to this one because a lot of the figures haven't come out. A lot of the real world testing hasn't been made public for these vehicles. So this is based on everything I could find, and some of it was estimates, some of it was speculation by various publications, so keep that in mind. However, the Hummer does have the most power. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But given the size, weight, battery, and power of that vehicle, it's probably likely that that's going to have the most towing capacity. Somewhere in the 14 to 16,000 pound range, which is quite a lot, even by today's standards with normal vehicles. If that is true, then the Hummer has everybody beat. The Cybertruck, they've said 14,000 pounds, which that's really good, and that's a number that they're telling us. That's not just like an estimate. Then the Rivian comes in at 11,000 pounds of towing, and then the Ford comes in at 10,000 pounds, which, keep that in mind. You can tow a boat, a camper, a trailer with a big vehicle on it. I mean, that is more than enough towing for most people. Maybe if you're in construction, that'll matter a little bit more. But overall, that's a lot of weight that you can tow. And one of the benefits of these electric vehicles, they have tons of torque, which you'll see in a moment. And that's going to really help with all of that towing. All right, so range. This is a big one, especially for anybody who's going from a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle. There's that idea of range anxiety that not only I don't want to run out, but also how long is it going to take and where do I have to plug in somewhere in order to charge up? So Tesla's got everybody beat here. I mentioned before how they were taking 2 of their kind of standard Tesla batteries and mounting those in the floor of the truck. Well, that's going to benefit them huge here. So the range of the Tesla Cybertruck, they're advertising 500 plus. So that means that you can literally drive all day and probably not run out of battery. keeping in mind, obviously, how heavy your foot is, what kind of terrain, if you're towing stuff or have a lot of cargo. But long and short of it, they're advertising 500 miles. So they're in first place, easily. Rivian's pretty close behind. They're at 400 miles. So yes, it's 20% less, but 400 miles of range, that's actually more than a lot of gas cars for range. I'll use my Mini as an example. My Mini, fully loaded tank of gas, 35 miles a gallon. I'm only getting about 300, 320 miles out of it. So 400 miles is actually a pretty decent range. And I don't think I've ever actually taken my Mini a full tank of gas in one drive, in one day, and continuing on further. So just something to keep in mind. And then after that, you have the Hummer is advertising 350 miles range for the top spec trim, and then Ford is advertising 300. So that gives you kind of a relative sense. But that's pretty impressive. The Cybertruck is actually like 200 miles more than what the Ford is advertising. So one thing I want to mention here, and it was actually like highlighted in some of the documentation from Ford, is that 300 miles of range, which sounds low kind of in the company that it's with. That 300 miles of range is with 1,000 pounds of cargo. Now, I'm not sure if that includes any passengers or if that's total additional weight on top of the vehicle. So if I'm 200 pounds and I have a passenger that's 200 pounds, maybe that means there's only 600 in the back. But keep in mind, that's 1,000 pounds of weight being accounted for in those mileage estimates. So what we've heard rumors of in testing is that that range in real world is actually a lot higher. You're generally not going to be carrying 1,000 pounds of cargo around with you everywhere you go on kind of your normal day-to-day driving. All right, so everybody's favorite thing, bragging rights. How much power do these things have? Hummer EV, 1,000 horsepower right out of the gate. They advertised it during the Super Bowl. That's a standout figure. They're moving into the 4-digit range. So 1,000 horsepower, they're the biggest show in town, most horsepower, flat out. The Cybertruck is probably in second. They've advertised that it's going to be 800 plus. It probably will be, but they haven't given us a final figure, so I don't know for sure. After that is the Rivian, which makes 754 horsepower, which is still quite a bit. And then the Ford is after that at 563. So it gives you sort of a sense. But isn't that crazy? The Hummer EV is almost 2 F-150s worth of power. All right, so rate with horsepower. Now we're going to talk torque. This is going to get a little bit dicey. There are a lot of opinions out there, and some of the makers have made this a little bit harder to come by. So keep that in mind. Hummer is advertising that they will have 11,500 pound-feet of torque. That is not the whole story here, though. You look at any other vehicle, and at most, the Cybertruck is saying 1,000, Rivian's saying 900, Ford is saying 775 pound-feet. So what the heck? What's the deal with this Hummer EV? The horsepower, it's more, but it's not like crazy more. But then they're saying that they have 10 times the torque. Something's not adding up. So there are some great videos out there that explain this, but the long and short of it is that they are probably providing the wheel torque figure, which is the power coming through the actual wheels through gear reduction. What that means is that the power at the motors themselves is different than the power and the amount of torque that the wheels have because you don't have the mechanical advantage of gearing. Long story short, I read up on it a little bit, and it works out to, if you take in some of the other things that they've said about the truck, you compare it to some of the others, and you have some baseline numbers to go with. What it means is that the Hummer is probably around 1,400 pound-feet of torque, which is a ton of torque. I mean, I think that's more than a Bugatti Veyron. So that's a ton of torque, but it's not the 11,500 that they say. Tesla has said that they're going to have about 1,000 pound-feet of torque, so that puts them in second pretty handily. Rivian is at 900, and then Ford is at 775. So one of the cool things about this is that no matter which one you pick, it has more torque, and it's instant torque at 0 RPM than any gas motor vehicle that most of us have probably ever owned, much less even driven. So that's going to be really handy, not only for those times when you need to carry a lot of weight or tow something heavy, but also when you put your foot down and you want to impress your friends or make everybody's hats fly into the back seat. That's going to be a pretty cool thing. All right, so coming with all that power and torque, we've got motor counts. Rivian is going to have 4, 1 at each wheel, so that probably gives them an advantage because they can control torque to each tire much more specifically. The Hummer EV, as well as the Tesla, their top trim are going to have tri-motor, so 3 motors in it, and that's going to put them in second place. And then Ford has only 2 motors, front and back, and then those are separated via probably some sort of mechanical clutches and differentials that control the power to each side of the vehicle. All right, Next is base prices. This is really interesting. So Ford and Tesla with the Cybertruck are both in the $39,900 range. There's an advantage here to Ford though. They haven't used up that $7,500 federal tax credit. Tesla had that. You may remember back when Tesla first was launching, for the first couple of years, you could get a tax credit, a big one, when you bought those vehicles. And it gave people an advantage and a little bit of incentive to buy an EV, especially at that time when there was very little infrastructure. Ford now has that advantage, at least for the next couple of years probably, with the F-150 Lightning, where the new vehicle is actually eligible for that $7,500 tax credit. So you start at $39,900, subtract $7,500, and you work out to about $32,474 in base price. But to get in the door for a little over 30 grand is pretty amazing, especially for the capabilities of this vehicle. So that puts Ford in the lead, but I would say once that tax credit's gone, Tesla and Ford are pretty much apples to apples right there. Then it gets a little more pricey. The Rivian's base price for a stripped out lowest spec model is $67,500, so that's some significant money. It's about double what the other vehicles are. And then coming in last is the Hummer EV at about $80,000 for the base model, and it only goes up from there. Speaking of going up from there, we're now going to talk fully loaded. So if you check every box on these vehicles and you want to see with that top spec trim, the most power, every whiz-bang feature, where are you going to be and how much are you going to be spending? Tesla and Ford both kind of tie. They both have estimated around $90,000, which is a lot of money for a truck, but you're also getting a lot in return. So keep in mind that these vehicles are going to be lower overall maintenance and cost less to own, as well as you're not filling them with gas, and the cost of electricity is a lot less than gasoline is. So they may be more expensive up front, but you're certainly earning some of that back. And if you plan to keep the vehicles for a long time, this is something you might be able to drive these vehicles 20 years or something, because they are going to be very reliable. There's not a lot of parts that can actually fail on them from a mechanical standpoint. So we're at $98,000 for the Rivian, fully trimmed out. And then on the Hummer EV, it's over $100,000. They've just labeled it as $100,000 plus. So read into that what you will. Those are going to be pretty expensive trucks. Though certainly the $90,000 for the Ford and $90,000 for the Tesla is not far ahead of them. So they're all going to get very expensive if you fully load everything. But if you do a modestly spec'd vehicle, you probably can get a lot of the features you want and not have to pay nearly as much. So next is seating capacity. And Tesla, again, they're going to win here. They've got 6. They've got the ability in the center to have that console flip up and have a third seat in the front, plus 3 in the back. So that gives you 6 seating in a pickup truck. And then the other 3 vehicles are all 5-seaters. So 3 in the back, 2 in the front with a console in between. So Tesla wins that one as well. And last but not least is release date. So the Rivian is actually coming out June of 2021, which is this month. The other vehicles, both the Ford and the Tesla, are advertised as spring of 2022. So I don't know, about 8 months away, something like that. But then if you look at the Hummer, it's not far behind. It's just saying 2022, so that might also be spring. So Rivian's got the slight edge there of being first to market, but they're actually not that far ahead of everyone else. So it's actually going to be really neat that all of these products are hitting the market within less than a calendar year of each other. So that's pretty cool. So a quick tally here of all of these categories, and I'll probably show a graphic of kind of the overall. So the Tesla and the Hummer both categorize as winning 6 of those categories. The Rivian comes in at winning 3 of the categories, and then Ford wins 2. So that tells you offhand kind of the relative stacking. But keep in mind that all of those numbers, they don't tell the whole story. Sometimes a vehicle that's best at a couple things, but maybe not the best at some other things, actually is overall the better vehicle. I got a lot of flack when I put out the video about the Rivian of Tesla people saying, hey, the Cybertruck's going to do this and the Cybertruck's going to do that. And then some other people chimed in and said, hey, wait a minute, what about the Hummer EV? I am not saying that any one of these vehicles is better than the other. I'm excited about all of them. But it's going to be interesting to see which areas the vehicles excel at. And then especially once they're actually kind of out in the market and people are putting miles on them, and start seeing like how reliable are they, how happy are the owners, do the interiors hold up, and how good are they at their target, task. So Are you going to see Cybertrucks at a work site? Are you going to see Rivians towing huge loads? Are you going to see people in the Hummer EVs jumping over sand dunes? All of that stuff, I'm really excited about it. So I thought this video would be a good kind of point in time to see, like right now, just before the first one hits market, let's see kind of where they all stack up next to each other. So anyway, I hope this was informative. I'm going to be following EVs pretty closely because I probably will replace my Tacoma with an electric truck at whatever point I need to. So I'm hoping to drive that as long as I can. However, I'm going to be focusing on which EV truck is the best. If you enjoyed this video and you're into EVs, I'm going to be having more content, so please consider subscribing. And until next time, Fred out.